I think it's very difficult to identify with something when it isn't at that emotional, human, individual level. We want our readers to walk in our main character's shoes and empathise. And I actually think it's very difficult to do that when it's very large external sort of stakes.
Hello, this is Louise Dean, founder of the Novelry, the world's best-loved school for writers, with more 5-star reviews than any other and a whole bunch of published success stories. As an award-winning Booker-listed author, I founded the Novelry to help writers avoid the frustrations of writing solo for years by getting wise eyes on the most important element of writing right from the get-go. Story, story, story. And this is our podcast to give you everything you need for happy writing. This is the Novelry on Writing.
Hi, I'm Kate Riordan. I'm an author coach at the Novelry. I'm also a writer of mystery, suspense and historical fiction. And with me today is the lovely Josie Humber.
Hi. I'm Josie Humber. I was a commissioning editor for many years at various publishers, at Pan Macmillan and at Hodder and Stoughton. And now I'm head of upmarket and literary fiction here at the Novelry. So I work lots on books, manuscripts. I give feedback to loads of authors who are trying to really tease out what's good about their novel, what's not working. And something that comes up a lot in those conversations is what we're going to talk about today, which is stakes.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one because I think if you're writing, crime and suspense, it's quite obvious that you need to raise the stakes, but really it applies to all genres.
Absolutely. Yeah, quite often, regardless of the genre, if I'm reading it and I'm thinking, I'm not really engaging very much, these characters are kind of meandering around a little bit, like what's their purpose? A lot of the time, if you stand back and think, okay, what's at stake if they don't do what they're doing right now and there's nothing there, then that can be a really key indicator of like why your novel isn't working. We've both kind of come up with some tips today of what could make your novel work better, to raise those stakes and really kind of take the drama and tension as high as possible.
You start.
Okay. My number one first tip is you've got to make sure your main character can't just walk away from the problem that they've got. And that sounds like such a basic thing to say in that, it sounds really obvious, but actually the number of times where a manuscript isn't quite working and I'm kind of working on the edit, I look at it and I think, okay, you've thrown all these rocks at this person, all this drama, and they've got this huge problem they're facing, but actually they could just go home and go move back in with their mum and they'll be fine.
I think you see it a lot in film and TV, and it's the most annoying thing. And you're saying to the screen, just phone the police. Or, just leave the spooky house.
Yeah, leave the spooky house, go home, stop trying to get into that basement and you'll be fine. Obviously, there's not that many books I was trying to think of examples, and there's not that many books published where the stakes feel low like that because they wouldn't get published. Yeah. And so actually, I was more analysing what those stakes are. So I was thinking about The Devil Wears Prada, which I'm sure, lots of people have seen the movie, but it was a book before that, a really good book. And with that, she's working this awful job with, in this magazine with this terrible boss. And if she could just walk away and she could just, if she had a cushy job elsewhere that was an offer, or she had, a partner earning loads of money where she didn't need to work, then the stakes of that situation would completely dispel and it wouldn't be such a problem anymore. But what you need to have is, she's late on her rent and she's been trying for years to try and get a job, and this is the one place that has offered her something. And so you raise the stakes really high by making it really clear why she can't just walk away from that situation, and she has to make it work despite the fact that she's absolutely hating every single day she's going into the office.
And actually then, in fact, she's such a workaholic that she then loses her boyfriend. So then work is even more important because it's sort of everything.
And she feels like she's risked it all. So she can't then turn back. And
that's a good one. Another, I think, a really good way, almost a hack, really, is if you put someone in a situation where they actually can't leave physically, that can be really effective. And obviously we've got Agatha Christie to thank for that subgenre almost of the closed circle mystery or the closed room mystery. And Then There Were None is probably her favourite of mine. And I think it's so effective because it's on this island and they literally can't leave. So even as people are getting picked off one by one, they can't go. So that's a
really great hack.
An easy way to do it. And the other thing I was thinking of, which is not unlike what you were saying with The Devil Wears Prada, and Andy not wanting to lose the opportunity of this dream job, is something, it's going back to character. And I think if ever in doubt, go back to character. And it's that somebody who might have a moral obligation to stay put. So something like an older sibling who's desperate to leave home and they've got a little brother or sister who's living in this horrible environment and they don't want to leave them to the clutches of their horrible father or something. So again, that's something the reader can immediately understand and won't get frustrated because they understand completely why they would never leave.
I love that.
I thought of another point, which was, again, on the surface sounds simple and obvious, but I think particularly for people not writing in kind of crime and thriller and suspense, might not think of it, which is to introduce an antagonist. It's so good at raising the stakes. And there are different ways of approaching it. Obviously, you can have a straightforward baddie, you know, somebody who is an actual person who's making things difficult. But I think also you can look at it in a more kind of lateral way. So I was thinking of actually people being their own worst enemy. And if it's coming from within, I think that can be really compelling and quite deep and psychological. And I was thinking one of my favourite books ever is The Remains of the Day by Ishiguro.
Yeah.
And actually Stevens the butler, actually the antagonist there, I guess you could say, is the English class system in many ways, but actually is also his own repression. He can never have a proper relationship with anyone because he's so repressed.
And you can't leave yourself. You know,
No.
you can't get rid of that antagonist just
You can never escape yourself.
by running away.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about I was trying to think of examples of interesting antagonists, and one of them is My Sister the Serial Killer, where in many ways her sister is the antagonist in that she's going around killing men, and that's what the main character then has to try and resolve. But because she's her sister, and actually her goal really is to help her sister and to cover up her crimes and to make sure that she doesn't lose her sister. So although she's the antagonist, she's totally trapped by her in that she can't just call the police. She has to kind of continue on through the kind of awful crimes that she's committing. And it raises the stakes much more than perhaps a classic antagonist because she can't get rid of her, because the answer can't be just call the police and
has become almost an accessory herself to the crimes by not saying anything. And that's sort of a bit like the first point as well. A lot of these actually overlap and kind of build on each other, I think. And if you do all of them, you'll really, really have high stakes.
Yes, and it's also about ratcheting it up bit by bit. So it might start off that her sister is the person that's killed someone, but as she gets more and more complicit in the crimes, then the stakes get higher and higher because she can't just turn herself in.
It's that point of no return is something that kept cropping up as a phrase in my head. So you don't even necessarily start with some stakes and then just keep those. Actually, like you say, that ratcheting up and layering it on and making it as difficult as possible for your hero, your main character, is really, really effective.
Yeah, so it could be when they first do something bad, they could maybe turn themselves in and walk away from the problem, but bit by bit, it gets deeper and deeper into the problem to the point where they can't see where they could turn anymore. I came up with another one of to consider the emotional stakes as much of this as the story stakes.
Oh, yeah.
And I was trying to work out how to explain this exactly, but and an example I came up with, which is a bit of a crude example of a bomb being set in a classroom. And that feels like really obvious stakes. There's children in the classroom. You've got your main character could be a kind of bomb disposal man. And he needs to come in and he needs to, detonate this bomb or stop it going off. And that feels high stakes. But what you could do to then ramp that up even further is really explore his emotional stakes in the story. Yeah. So thinking, could it be that one of the children in the room is his fiance's child? Or could it be that he lost a child of his own when he was younger and he promised that he would make sure no other parent would ever go through that same thing again? So really working out what within that character specifically is really going to pull them through and make them be the perfect person for this story, and also mean that it's not just about the collateral damage of the within the story, it's about the personal stakes for them.
Yeah, and I actually think as humans and as readers, I think it's really difficult to not have a personal story. I think it's very difficult to identify with something when it isn't at that emotional, human, individual level. We want our readers to walk in our main character's shoes and empathise. And I actually think it's very difficult to do that when it's very large external sort of stakes. We need to put ourselves in that position if it was our child who was in a classroom that had been locked down.
Yeah.
One of the things I was thinking of, again, when we were discussing this stuff, is actually it's amazing if you watch the news how often they will home in on an individual story to really kind of, I don't know, bring it home to people, because we all get inured to horrible stats about people, being killed in parts of the world, but actually they will often follow a particular father who's looking for his child or whatever it is, and suddenly and that's a fiction trick, really. I thought of The Kite Runner, which is one of the hero books that we use at the Novelry as a technical guide, as you know. When I coach historical fiction students, it's really interesting how often they're so worried about getting the backdrop right and getting their research right that they lose sight of the emotional stakes and the internal stakes. And their characters often are a bit cipher-like. They're a bit two-dimensional, a bit cardboardy, because they're so busy kind of, right, now when did that happen in the Second World War? And actually,
and it can start to feel like the history is kind of happening to them rather than because of them.
Yes, and that's an agency problem, which is another thing you're always looking out for as an editor. It's characters that are just being buffeted about, really. They've got no agency.
But you're right, it needs to be the personal stakes within that wider situation.
Yeah.
And that's what's you're going to remember long after the book's finished.
Yeah, I mean, like with The Kite Runner, that is a beautiful portrayal of a particularly difficult sort of period of time in Afghanistan. But what I took away from it, really, if I'm honest, was that it was it really made me cry, that story about friends and father and son and that sort of thing. It was that emotional connection.
With courses, coaching and community, the Novelry is the world's top-rated writing course. You'll come up with the idea for a novel you can't wait to write, then you'll write a finished draft, and you'll edit your novel into a book that readers will love. A Big 5 publishing editor will review your novel. So, if you've got a book in you and you've never found the right time to write it, now there's a good place. Come on over to the Novelry. Beginners welcome. We'll show you how to start, coach your story into shape, and cheer you on to type the end.
So sometimes I think some of our writers will come up with a great premise or a great hook, and we're all for that, and that's really what publishers tend to be looking for.
It's what I talk about all the time. You need to find a hook, otherwise it's just really difficult to make a book work in publishing, to be able to find readers for it if you can't describe it in that kind of single hooky sentence.
Which I know lots of writers find a bit dispiriting, but actually what's fun and what gets you back to that kind of, I don't know, the craft stuff that we love as writers and the character stuff, is actually take your premise and then think about the main character being somebody who is so ill-suited to coping with that particular situation that will raise the stakes for you. And I was thinking Rebecca is a great example. I love Rebecca. It's one of my favourite books ever. So
I reference Rebecca all the time.
I reference Rebecca all the time, and lots of people use it as their hero book. And that's a great example because actually the second Mrs. De Winter is so colourless and gauche and naive, and she's thrown into this situation, actually a reasonably confident woman who's dealing with the idea of this first wife who is so much more glamorous, it doesn't hit as hard. So that basic premise, which is so strong about second wife is haunted by first wife, is great anyway. But you add in the fact that Rebecca is gorgeous and charismatic. And the second Mrs. De Winter, who isn't even given a name, is the very opposite of that. And she doesn't have any friends in the world, so she has everything to lose. Your stakes are huge, and I think that is, along with the amazing atmosphere and that hook, is one of the reasons that book has survived so long.
Yeah, so one thing you can do when you're looking for your hook is really, you've got your interesting premise, but then trying to find that one character who would be the absolute worst suited for that premise you're putting them in. And I was thinking about the Rosie Project for this, of the fact that the main character in that, he wants to find a wife, but he's going about, what should be love and romance. He's going about it in a really clinical way where he's, creating spreadsheets and quizzes. And so he's, in many ways, he seems like he's the worst character in the world to be put in these circumstances. But if he wasn't, if he was this suave guy who's had loads of relationships and can easily get a woman, then that would take all of the stakes out of the story. Like it wouldn't even be a story.
Yeah, and there'd be no humor in it either, and it's a really funny book and touching, and that would all be lost, like you say.
So you're having to you're putting this character in a situation that they're so ill suited for that you really want to get behind them and you want them to succeed, which is a huge way of making a book compelling, is getting your reader behind your main character.
That's very true. The other example I was thinking of, actually, again, going back to that sort of psychological suspense, because I think that works really well with this method of premise first and then retrofitting your character, is Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn, which is obviously a massive seller as well. And I think, again, it's got a really strong hook. Woman fakes her own death to frame her cheating husband for murder. But actually, if you look at Amy Dunn as a character who has always been spoiled, she's her parents' muse, she's had a children's book series written about her, she's amazing, Amy. And what he does in their marriage is takes her out to the sticks, and then he starts cheating on her with a younger model. And so, she's made to feel ordinary, and she's not amazing anymore. And the rage that comes from that, I think, really helps with that motivation of her character, because she does this crazy thing, but it's pulled off because actually it's completely believable. So again, that's using character.
It seems like you're really on Amy's side here.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I did. I found it really difficult to not like her. She's desperately unlikable. And with that hapless husband.
And I think he is also an example of a character being put in a situation they're totally ill-suited for, because he's incredibly hapless, and suddenly he's having to try and prove himself that he's not killed his wife.
Yeah. And
he doesn't know the first thing about how to go about doing that, and he's making all the mistakes of, he smiles at a press conference or something like that, and so he's making kind of wrong moves at every turn, and it's almost like she knew that he would be doing these wrong moves at every turn, and she knew exactly how she was going to get him. Such a good book.
I know, I love that book.
And the final hack that we came up with was to add a ticking time bomb into your narrative. And this, it does feel like a bit of a hack in terms of it sounds almost a bit silly. But you can do it very much as a metaphor. It doesn't need to be actually putting a bomb into your manuscript and waiting for it to go off whilst, there's a rom-com going on. But so I was trying to think of, examples of this which are not thriller related at all. And the one I came up with is actually, to take it out of the book world for a second, is My Best Friend's Wedding with Julia Roberts. Because on the surface of it, that could be quite a boring story about a woman who realizes that her best friend is actually the one she wants to be with, and so she tells him she's in love with him. But where all the drama and stakes come into it are that when she goes to tell him that, he says, oh no, I need to go first, and announces that he's engaged and that he's going to be getting married in a week's time. So suddenly you have this 1 week, maybe it's even a few days, time frame of this ticking time bomb down to this wedding, where Julia Roberts has to try and stop this wedding and try and find a way to tell him that she loves him. And if it wasn't for that impetus and that very set date of the wedding, it would be kind of boring. She could do it next week. She could wait for the perfect time. So it gives you that situation where she can't wait for the perfect time. She has to do it in these kind of crazy situations.
But it also, I think it really controls your narrative. As a writer, it's so scary starting that first draft. And actually, if you've got that built in, you've got a really good roadmap. It's like day 1, day 2, the day before the wedding. So you don't get that sprawl, which I think really freaks a lot of new writers out.
And I love that in a manuscript where you see day 1, or you see 7 days until it happens at the top of a chapter, and that can be a really good hack.
That's a really good hack. I did it myself in one of my books, The Stranger. I had a prologue, and then the rest of the book is in flashback, and then counted down to that prologue. So there was a body found, drowned on the beach, and then it was kind of 7 weeks before Diana goes missing. So all the time, it's just like background stress for the reader in a good way.
In a really good way, yeah.
Yeah. So I think actually have a look at your book, and if there's any way you can tighten it up, or, it could just be the chapter headers. That's kind of what I did. And I thought, I can totally do this. And it's going to add this sense of urgency and momentum and propel readers through. And they won't even consciously realise in a way. So it does a lot of work for you.
Yeah, if you can add anything into the manuscript where it's just that this thing has to happen by a certain date, then it means that everything gets ramped up a gear, because no one's prepared. Everyone has to be running around trying to make sure that happens by that date. And 3 hours
Rosamund Lupton. For those who haven't read it, it's about a school siege where everything's locked down, and it literally takes place over 3 hours. And the way she does it is she moves POVs a lot, so you end up really invested in various groups of people who can't get to each other, and it's really tense. It's tense and emotional.
And literally the whole hook is, this takes place in 3 hours. You are going to be tense for the entire reading experience because we're going to be taking you step by step through this school siege. So it really, amplifies those stakes in a way that, if you didn't have that very specific end in sight, then it might feel a little bit more meandering.
A bit. And I think I read that in one sitting, and it was partly that, I almost read it in real time, which was amazing. Yeah. So, and I'm thinking of 24 now, the TV series. But I think that's, if you can somehow work that in, I think it pays dividends.
I think that's all the tips we've got.
Yeah, I think that's all the tips we need.
Thank you for joining us today. We're so pleased to have you along for the writing journey, and we hope to see you on another episode of The Novelry on Writing. If you'd like to learn more, visit us at thenovelry.com. From first draft to finished manuscript, at The Novelry you'll enjoy one-to-one coaching from best-selling authors, live writing classes with award-winning authors and literary agents, and you'll work with a publishing editor all the way for submission to literary agents toward a publishing deal. All writers learn from other writers, even the greats. Write your novel in good company. Join us at The Novelry. We'll show you how to start, coax your story into shape, cheer you on to type the end.